until now, I guess it's been almost a taboo subject. It's become much more popular. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, the concept is as you get older, you have less of it or none. No, we've continued as in the past, a little bit less, but continued.
If you don't have the person that you are interested in, and if you don't have the person that you desire, I imagine the desire for sex vanishes, it goes away.
It's quite active. In fact, I have a desire for sex now, at this age, more than I did since I was a young adult.
When I was growing up, way back 25 years ago, older people never talked about sex. We never talked about it. And we didn't dare to talk about it. So that older people now are afraid, and they're very embarrassed when you talk about sexuality, especially sexuality in older people.
Ours was the secrecy generation. When we, and I'm now talking about women and men in their 60s and 70s, when we were 3 or 4 years old, we had already learned not to touch ourselves down there, especially if there were anybody around to see us. By the age of 5 or 6, we learned that we were not to engage in sexual explorations with other little girls or boys, especially if there were anyone around to see us. Then we could get engaged and married and have a baby in public, but as soon as that baby was 2 or 3 years old, a new clamp of secrecy sealed our mouths and affected our behavior. Not even by a creaking bedspring was little Johnny or little Mary to know that Mommy or Daddy were sexually active. We came on to our own children from the age of 2 or 3 with a great big lie, namely, Mommy and Daddy are not interested in things like that. So now our children are in their 30s and 40s, and we are in our 60s and 70s, and we are surprised that they think we are still non-sexual.
Thank you. Much of the public's attitude about love, aging, and sexuality is based in humor. And nowhere is it more evident than in a greeting card store. If you browse through the racks of birthday cards, those aimed at persons 40 and older frequently include references to being over the hill. The messages on the cards cater to what card manufacturers think the public believes, that passion and romance are only for the young. To suggest otherwise is humorous. But this humor more accurately reflects stereotyped myths than facts.
For all too many years, we've blamed age for everything. You know, if we had problems with our heart, we assumed it was all related to aging. If we had problems with memory, it's all senility, all connected with aging. If we had problems with sexuality, it's all related to, quote, aging. Now we know that aging is not quite the terrible process it had been thought to be. It has a significant impact, but social problems, medical disease, medications that we may be on, personality differences between ourselves and others or within ourselves, all of these can influence the character of the way in which we are when we grow old. And that includes our lovemaking and our sexuality.
This is not the manuscript.
Noted gerontologist Robert Butler and social gerontologist and social worker Myrna Lewis began writing about sexuality and aging in 1976.
Yes.
What made it important to us to write a book about this topic, especially 10 years ago, was there was such disparagement and ridicule about the idea of older people having sex or being interested in sex. They had no place to turn. In terms of basic information, what do you do if you've had a heart attack? What happens if you lose your husband? We've wanted to deal with and provide a sensitive, appropriate guide that would be helpful to people.
Older people themselves were very reluctant, very shy about expressing any feelings in this area. And I think what we're now seeing is the opposite side of that coin. I've been on several programs with audiences composed of older people, and what one typically sees is that they stand up and say, sex is great after 65, or some testimonial that gives you the impression that there are no problems. My personal view of that is that older people are so pleased that people are beginning to see them as human beings who can have relationships with other people and also a sexual relationship, that it's like what we saw in the 60s with Black Pride, only this is older person's pride. You know, they're saying things are not as bad as you young folks have all thought. You know, we have good times too.
Much of what the American public knows about human sexuality is due to the pioneering spirit of Dr. Alfred Kinsey and his associates at Indiana University's Institute for Sex Research.
Kinsey was essentially a zoologist and was impressed by the fact that he knew all about a particular species or a particular kind of wasp, but that nobody knew very much about a much more interesting species, namely the human species. So he set out very patiently over a 15 or 20-year period, collecting sexual histories from more than 14,000 women and men, out of which came the first comprehensive, reliable account of how human beings behave sexually.
The studies came to be known as the Kinsey Reports, and their publication of America's sexual practices created a great deal of controversy. Despite this, the public was fascinated by the findings. Thousands of men and women flocked to Kinsey's public lectures, and a Gallup poll reported that 5 of every 6 persons in the country approved of the studies. For Ed Brecker, there was a special interest in the findings.
Well, my late wife, Ruth Brecker, and I gave our sexual histories to the Kinsey Project back in the early 1950s. Wardell Pomeroy, who was Kinsey's closest associates, questioned us both.
The experience had a lasting impact on Brecker, who turned to writing about human sexuality as a specialty. More than 2 decades later, that commitment took a twist. He was called upon to coordinate a study for the publishers of Consumer Reports magazine.
What I expected to learn was how it is like with other people. At that time, I knew only one 65-year-old myself, and I wanted to see whether I was a freak. And I am glad to report that it turned out I was not a freak.
More than 4,000 men and women between the ages of 50 and 93 took part in the Consumers Union study. Most had been married for over 30 years, and most to their first spouse. Others were widowed, divorced, or never married. They represented the largest sampling of older Americans in sex research. The study found that while sexual activity undergoes a gradual steady decline from the 50s on, a majority of older men and women remain sexually active. It also notes that persons who remain sexually active in their 50s, 60s, and 70s report a higher level of life enjoyment than those who are sexually inactive. But in spite of these findings, more than 3,000 of the respondents agreed that society thinks older persons are non-sexual. One reason for this apparent contradiction may have to do with the unusually high number of single persons in the older population. And one place this phenomenon is most evident is the retirement community of Miami Beach, Florida.
In the later years, the single person is at the mercy of horrifying demographic statistics. There are 2.7 unmarried women over 50 for every 1 unmarried man over 50. And then when you subtract the men and women who are already coupled, already engaged in a continuing coupled relationship, and you eliminate the gay men and women, you are left with 5 heterosexual, unattached women over 50 for every one heterosexual, unattached man over 50, and these 5-to-1 odds are close to overwhelming.
Front, side, back.
Bessie Sosland is one of thousands of single women living in retirement in the Miami Beach area.
Right.
It's not a question of are you interested. There are not too many men around. As you know, there's a lot of women around. And if you're interested or not, there aren't any. And then men get old. Women stay younger. So what do you want to take an old man for and go where? Go dancing with him or go to a movie? You know, there's practical things in life that you start to consider. Okay, to date a person, to date a man and go out is one thing, and to get attached and have a relationship and think seriously, what for? I'm 82, and I'm going to date a man of 85, 89. What's the fun? What for?
But not all women agree. Lydia Bragger is 82 years old and lives in New York City.
I've always felt, as far back as I can remember, that love, caring, warmth, and sex were my #1 priority. I find that I meet men, and as soon as they find out how old I am, I don't know if they think you're going to fall apart when you get 80 years old or what, but there's something, is ageism. There's so many women around for the men now, they can pick and choose quite a bit. You know, older women are afraid of being rejected because that's what happens many times. You go up and talk to someone and you're friendly and you're very apt to be rejected. But I say it's better to try and be rejected than not take a chance and be accepted. I am seeing someone now, not too often, but I am. He enjoys good music. He's very warm and is always there if I want him. And sometimes I don't for a while, you know, and it's all right too. It's very important to me to have contact and to have be able to share things. That has been a very important part of my life. It always has. And I haven't changed that.
Ironically, women are not the only victims of the gender imbalance. Single men, mostly widowers, also face an awkward situation.
Men who are available, who are interested in meeting somebody, often find that they become like sex objects, that they can't trust the situations they get themselves into, and they also don't know what's expected of them.
Oh, me too.
In Lincoln, Nebraska, the male members of the Widowed Persons Service have formed a support group that meets for breakfast at a local restaurant.
We found that there's some men who don't want to mix with the female sex because they feel that those gals are out looking for men and want to grab them off for more reasons than one, probably.
I like companionship and talking to people, but other than that, there's no reason for me to, I have no desires to get married or have any trouble that way.
When I lost my wife three and a half years ago, I couldn't stand the thought of going to another woman. And I went along about 6 months, and then finally I started going to the singles dances and met the other ladies, and now I'm normal again, and I enjoy the opposite sex. I enjoy dancing and dating, and so my kids are in favor of it. They call me a swinger now.
I don't want to become involved with another woman. Because at 85 years, I feel I'm living on borrowed time to a certain extent. I love my wife. I was absolutely crazy over my wife. And I know I would compare another woman with her, and then I think my life would be a misery. I know there's some darn good women out there, but that's just the way I feel about it. I'm happy to the way I am. If I want to do something, I don't have to account to anybody, and I feel comfortable this way.
Most older men and women were brought up to believe that the proper way to live is with a spouse by their side. But for those who do overcome the odds of finding a partner, not all of them are embracing the traditional values of marriage. Ida Cook and David Tobin are among a growing number of older single adults who share an intimate relationship.
We're as man and wife. We are man and wife mentally, without the paper, so to speak.
Neither one of us was looking for a mate when we met on the golf course. I was interested in just keeping busy. I was working and met Ida, and she's such a grand lady. She's only, I don't even think she's 5 foot. She's got a lot of class and a cute little figure. And
he likes my legs.
You know, we just sort of just blended in, that's it.
When my husband passed away, I had absolutely never planned or expected to have a male friend. It just turned out that I happened very soon to meet David, and it just evolved that we were good for one another.
So good, in fact, that their relationship off the golf course soon revolved around dining together at Ida's home.
Neither one of us cared too much for the restaurants, so I would bring her the raw materials, and then I found out that she didn't like anything in a raw state, and she would immediately prepare it. So then I would bring her everything in a raw state, and she'd cook it up.
Oh no, he would say that he's shopping for himself, and that he brought the raw food, and can I use your refrigerator? Now you boys, you know, I'm just telling you what you should do when the time comes. And so I said, okay, put it in my refrigerator, and then I couldn't stand any raw food, you know. I said, I'll cook it, and then you take it home, and slowly that's the way it developed. Well, then finally, why go home? Might as well eat it here. And slowly that's the way it developed, and it turned out that we were together all the time. After all, there's no reason to get married. We might. Some people feel it's necessary. They don't feel comfortable unless they're married.
I would say that the ones that we know are happy.
Yes.
For both of us.
Well, people have said to us, oh, well, we wouldn't do it. They wouldn't live as we live, like together and as a married couple without actually being married. I've had someone say it's not for me.
How men and women adapt to the gender imbalance is partly a matter of personal choice, but there are other factors that affect a person's sexuality, and underlying each individual's experience is the physiology of sexual aging. The physical outward signs of aging, wrinkles in the skin, graying and loss of hair, and redistribution of body weight, are generally regarded as expected life cycle changes. But the biological changes that affect a person's reproductive function or activity as a sexual partner are another matter. They are often misunderstood and perceived as signals of impending sexual problems.
The changes in sexuality that result from aging are mostly gradual, and also, if people were educated about them, I think they really could cope quite well.
If we look at normative physiological changes that occur in relationship to sexuality, they really start occurring in a significant way in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s.
The physiological changes associated with sexual functioning are complex. They involve the interaction of sex hormones with the genital organs, the nervous system, and circulatory system. The active female hormone is estrogen, which influences the development and functioning of the sex organs in women, while androgen, the primary male hormone, affects sexual desire as well as sexual development and performance in men. But as men and women grow older, the levels of these hormones decline, affecting the efficiency of reproductive functioning. Presently, more is understood about the role of female hormones in the sexual aging process, and most of the sexual changes that affect women are traceable to the decline of estrogen with the onset of menopause.
My menopause was not a very difficult one. I found that I got very, very tired. I wasn't working at the time, so while my family was away at school and my husband at work, if I felt tired, I would rest. So by the time they got home, they weren't really aware of the way I felt.
When I went into menopause, it was very abrupt. It was a surgical menopause. And it took about a month after I had the surgery before the problems arose. I shouldn't say problems. There was only one problem for me. That was the inability to be able to use any kind of estrogen pills. And of course the fact that I suffered greatly from hot flashes.
I had hot flashes only at night, not during the day at all, and my family never told me I was crabby, so I'm assuming I wasn't. And since I'm warm most of the time anyway, all it involved was like kicking the covers off whenever this would happen to me during the night.
I went cold turkey, 2 years. The hot flashes were terrific. I didn't tell anybody, my family or friends, what I was going through, and my daughter tells me I was very difficult at that time. Now she tells me. We just, at that time, didn't talk about it.
About 85% of women going through menopause have symptoms, and 15 to 20% of these women require some type of intervention. The most important intervention is estrogen replacement therapy, because the hallmark of menopause is a drop in hormone, a drop in estrogen levels. A drop in estrogen levels cause many of the problems that women experience during this time, the most important of which are hot flashes or flushes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, and the long-term problems of bone thinning or osteoporosis.
Other significant changes would be that a certain percentage of women after menopause with decreased estrogen have an altered perception of touch. And what was once experienced as pleasant touch to the skin is now experienced as either numbness or not response or downright unpleasant. And they don't understand that, but there's a kind of withdrawal and a desire not to be touched.
What happens then in terms of change in the woman often leads to confusion in the mind of the man.
Adding to the confusion is the fact that menopausal symptoms vary in duration for each woman, affecting some women for as long as 5 years. Not every woman has major problems with menopause, but those who do suffer may consider taking estrogen replacement therapy.
Vaginal dryness is a big problem that women experience when they're not given estrogen, or most women experience, and estrogen replacement therapy will prevent this from occurring. As well, estrogen replacement therapy will prevent hot flashes, night sweats, and all the other irritating symptoms that women have during this period of their life, so that this time can be a productive time, and it can be a time when they can pursue the interests that they have without having medical side effects and problems of lowered estrogen levels.
We also know that ovarian hormones are important in preventing osteoporosis, which is a major health problem in the United States. It's a problem which does not show up from a patient point of view till women are in their 60s or 70s. It's a very serious problem, and we do know that by age 75, if a woman falls and breaks her hip, within 4 months, 50% of the women have died of complications. We know that that's also preventable. So you might say then, why doesn't everybody take ovarian hormones? After all, if the ovaries stop producing a certain amount of hormone at age 50 or 51, then everybody should have such hormonal treatment prescribed. The problem in the past has been that the vital hormone, estradiol, which is an estrogen, if given alone, increases the risk of cancer. We know that it increases the risk of cancer of the lining of the uterus.
2 out of 1,000 women get this type of cancer each year. But when estrogen is taken to relieve menopause symptoms and to ward off the threat of osteoporosis, the risk of cancer rises to 18 in 1,000. However, recent scientific studies have found an acceptable solution to this problem.
All that needs to be done is to mimic what the ovaries were naturally doing. And that is not only to produce estradiol in the course of a month, but at the time of releasing an egg, to produce another hormone, which is called progesterone. And now it's been found, if 1,000 women were to take estrogen, in the form of estradiol or any other estrogen, every day of the month, and then for 12 days each month, just add progesterone to it, exactly what the ovary would be doing if it had been continuing, then there is no increase in cancer of the lining of the uterus. And in fact, it's now been shown there's a decrease.
Marcy, today we're going to get you started on some estrogens.
Although there are risks associated with taking estrogen, many women continue to choose hormone therapy for the benefits that estrogen provides. But most physicians believe that some women should not take estrogen if they have certain pre-existing medical conditions. However, any woman considering hormone therapy should have a comprehensive physical examination and consult a gynecologist or personal physician to reach the best possible decision. Unfortunately, some gynecologists fear that many women will never do this.
I was overwhelmed by the fact that most women were ignorant in terms of how to adjust to aging, what aging meant, what aging did to their sexuality and their sexual expression, and basically we're in the dark ages.
So in 1980, Dr. Bachman and her associate, Dr. Sandra Lieblum, began a series of menopause studies at the Rutgers Medical School in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Gloria and I have been interested in menopause for at least 7 years. And we've been doing a variety of research studies devoted to better understanding the sexuality, the life issue adjustment of perimenopausal and postmenopausal women.
I think the key to how women age is what they're like when they're younger. It's almost like after having hand surgery, if you play the piano before the surgery, you can play afterwards, but you can't play afterwards if you've never played before. And I found this to be true with aging as well. Women that have a high sexual desire and engage in sex frequently in the years before menopause continue to do so, or at least to have the desire after the menopause.
Tell us something about yourself.
We're not older, we're better.
Charlotte Strokas learned about the menopause group from a notice posted at a local senior center.
I read about it, and then I got interested because I felt I really didn't know much about menopause. And they said they would also study about sex after menopause. And I was interested in coming and find out just what other people are doing or how they feel about it. And I found that I'm perfectly healthy and normal if you're open and honest about it. My husband died, and I'm just catching up on my sex life.
Okay, your husband died when you were how old?
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
I'm going to be 62.
Okay, so this was when you were 59.
That's right.
Okay.
But I was separated for 18 years before that.
Okay, so basically you lived as an independent single woman.
That's right.
Okay.
But I never even went out. I looked at another man, and I didn't realize what I was missing.
Okay, can you tell us about, a little bit about what made for the transition for you from being essentially celibate and alone for a long period of time?
Oh, I thought about it. I read about it.
Yeah, you were interested.
I was interested.
You just weren't doing much.
No, I wasn't doing anything until I found the right partner.
Okay, what made that possible, do you suppose?
My brother, who was divorced, insisted I go out to the single dances and single affairs. And that's where you meet the men.
That's true.
Right? I stayed home and raised 3 children, worked 2 jobs. I was too busy.
There was no time.
There was no time.
Right.
And now it's wonderful to be single and older, and I don't have to worry about my children. I don't have to worry about the house.
Absolutely. What is the position of some other women in this regard, either in terms of your own sexual interest over the last 10 years or that of your partner?
I think that after I completed menopause and there was no more fear of having children, we became more active.
Is that so? Yeah. That your sexual frequency picked up after menopause? Other women's experience in terms of this dimension?
He just doesn't care anymore, I guess. He is not well, and he's been in and out of the hospital now for the past 2 months. And he just, I suppose if he gets better, maybe he'll feel different.
Okay, so you're saying that since his illness,
yes,
he has been less initiatory?
That's right.
Okay, what about before he was ill? Did you notice that he decreased the number of times he would make sexual overtures to you?
Well, yeah, sort of. Yeah, it wasn't like when you first got married, of course. I'll be married 41 years, but since he's gotten sick, he's just,
yeah,
you know, I guess he's thinking more about what he does have a lot of things wrong with him.
Can I ask you this? Do you still have what you would consider an adequate amount of physical affection with your husband?
Oh, well, that he does, yeah.
So you're still affectionate? You hug, you kiss, that kind of thing? Okay, but it's just not genital sex?
Right.
Okay, and that's okay with you?
Nope, fine with me.
Good. Okay, fine.
As long as they're both happy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. How has it been for you? How has sex changed now, being a long married woman?
I haven't done so much reading in my lifetime as I'm reading these days.
Is that so? Reading about sexuality?
Reading about anything.
What you're reading and not...
I just read and read. That's right.
Well, now are you saying that for you, your sexual life has diminished?
It has diminished drastically.
Since menopause, or since?
Just in the past 6 to 8 months, I would say.
Oh, okay. This is a recent change. Can you tell us why there's been?
I'd have to speak to my husband about that. He doesn't even talk about it anymore.
Okay. But he stopped initiating? Okay.
And I try to say, do you remember this? You remember that? He doesn't remember anything.
But I gather, Ethel, that you still have an interest in sex,
oh,
even
definitely. I have an interest, but I don't have a partner anymore.
Okay. Okay, that could be a real problem, huh?
I find that in most instances, men and women don't talk. That many times the husband doesn't understand what's going on with the woman, and she's reluctant to talk to him, and vice versa. And many times these do interfere with sexual expression. And if one spouse is reluctant to talk about it or communicate it to the other spouse, I think that's the most harmful part of, destroying sexual relations between a husband and wife. And I encourage communication between the spouses and joint learning together. If something comes up and they communicate, then they can come to me and say, this is what's happening, what can I do about it?
For Doctors Lieblum and Bachman, frank discussions like these are valuable in assessing the importance of life satisfaction, sexual desire, and sexual activity in postmenopausal women. But more importantly, the discussions are highly valued by the women themselves.
Well, I see a more openness with the women that I've been associating with in this than I have seen with any group of women at any time in my life. And I'm sorry they didn't have programs like this when I was younger, because then more people would be drawn into it, and a lot of people maybe would go through menopause more comfortably if they knew that they had more company in it and were able to let people know that there is a support system someplace.
Support groups and research studies are likely to continue because menopause is a universal event for women. But there is no similar event in the sexual aging of men. Unlike women whose fertility ceases with menopause, male hormone loss declines very gradually, and fertility may continue into a man's 90s. As a result, the sexual aging of men is a subtle process that occurs over a period of decades. The changes that men first notice start sometime in their 40s, when they begin comparing their present level of sexual activity to that of their teenage years and early adulthood. What they observe is a gradual decline in their overall sexual functioning, and that causes many men to worry.
Men have relatively little understanding of physiological aging. They have some expectations psychologically. Many men believe that it's normal to become impotent as you get older. There's a lot of pressure on men in our culture to perform sexually. In a sense, it's a cultural neurosis that male self-image and ego is so tied up in their ability to have sexual relations at any time, under any conditions. So I try to identify it as a cultural phenomenon. and take the pressure off the individual and say, look, this is the way that all men are conditioned in our culture. This is the value system we have. And you're at a point in your life where you don't need to identify yourself on the basis of your erectile functioning. You have other things in your life, other values, other parts of yourself that are worthy and valuable that you need to take some pride in, and take the pressure off. And the fact is that people who are normal medically, that don't have cardiovascular disease or diabetes, continue to function normally sexually, but things do slow down, just like everything else.
What aging does is slow the period of arousal. Takes you longer. You may have to wait a longer period of time before re-arousal. The actual tumescence and sexual intromission, the actual sexual experience, may take longer because it may take longer for ejaculation. But in many ways that's even an advantage, particularly in relationship to the woman's response.
A second thing to remember in the physical sense, a very simple thing, but it's a thing that lots of women and men do not know, and that is that as men grow older, they respond to and require more physical stimulation, manual stimulation, in order to become aroused. In other words, it's not just a matter of thinking about something that's sexually arousing and then immediately being aroused, as many men are when they're teenagers. As they grow older, that may not happen quite that same quick way.
Many men, however, misinterpret that and feel like once they start having problems, the handwriting's on the wall, they're going to stop being able to have sex.
What men fear is the onset of impotence, the ability to attain or maintain an erection to enable sexual intercourse. Nearly all men experience a temporary form of erectile dysfunction at some point in their lives. But about 1 out of every 10 American men suffer from a continuing or chronic impotence. And most men do not realize that impotence can have physical and psychological causes.
And the way most men find out that they have a sexual dysfunction problem is they gradually have increasing difficulty having erections. If they're going to see anyone at all, they will usually go to a family practitioner first. One of the problems with that is that family practitioners will often say, hey, it's just because you're getting old, and you know, there's nothing you can do about it, which is not true. If there's a problem, then the appropriate thing is to refer the patient to a specialist, such as a urologist, who would be better equipped to do testing for this problem.
Most of the time, I would say that they're prodded to come in. I think that basically they want to come in, but yet they're fearful. And so I'd say more than half of the time their mate or spouse kind of pressures them into coming in.
A physical exam is not always conclusive in determining the cause of impotence. In such cases, other diagnostic tools are necessary.
The best way to evaluate these kind of problems is an overnight sleep study in which there's continuous monitoring of erections, and you have some record of how long erections last and whether they're going up and down.
The study is called a nocturnal penile tumescence test. In most cases, the tests are taken in a hospital sleep lab on an outpatient basis and administered by a sleep physiology technician.
Now, probably with a complaint of impotence, you're wondering, why is all this sleep stuff so terribly important? It's vital in this particular type of testing because your periods of erection are going to be associated with a particular sleep stage.
Nocturnal penile tumescence meaning erection, is a normal phenomena. It occurs from birth to death in all normal males. Basically what happens is about every 90 minutes during sleep, in association with a particular sleep stage called rapid eye movement sleep, there are periods of erection that occur. As the night goes on, these erections tend to become a little bit longer and longer, but we know that if we're looking at a particular sleep stage, if the patient's functioning physically normally, he will have periods of erection.
The device that we're going to use to look at your penile tumescence, we call it, erection is what that means, is a portable computer. You're going to wear this.
By monitoring for this, if the patient
does have periods of erection during the nighttime and they're of adequate duration and they're of adequate rigidity, then the problem is probably psychological. If, however, the penile tumescence or penile erection during the nighttime is impaired, then we can say with some assurity that the problem is physical. The key here is that we're also monitoring for sleep stage, that we're also guaranteeing that the patient is indeed sleeping and that he's indeed having his rapid eye movement sleep. So it's important that this be done, in some facility that is equipped for sleep stage monitoring.
Until we started these types of tests, which really came into being on a widespread basis relatively 4 or 5 years ago, it was believed that 90% of male impotence was caused by psychological factors. 90%. Since we've been doing these tests, which are quite objective, and they're not based on anybody's opinion, and they're relatively artifact-free and accurate, it's turning out that it's about 50-50. About half of male impotence complaints are caused by medical, physical problems, and about half are caused by psychological problems of various sorts.
Results of a sleep lab test are usually referred to a urologist for further consideration. But regardless of the diagnosis, treatments are available for both physical and psychological impotence.
Well, naturally, the first goal is to find the underlying cause, correct it, reverse it, and have them functioning normally again. And frequently this is the case. We're able to do that by, example, changing their blood pressure medicine from one to another and that sort of thing. But if perchance it's not a correctable cause for whatever reason, there are still several options available. One, and this one is fairly frequently chosen, is to do nothing, and that's an option.
If there's an easily corrected underlying cause, for example, a hormone imbalance, males sometimes have a testosterone deficiency or other hormone problems. Those can sometimes be treated directly and very effectively, hormone shots, for example, if that's what the underlying cause is. Some men have impotence, physical impotence, due to structural defects of the body of the penis itself. In those cases, you'd go in and you'd fix whatever the underlying structural problem was. And in those cases, you're treating the underlying dysfunction.
Another option of treatment is psychological counseling. Even if the problem is a physical one, sometimes psychological counseling is of great benefit to the patient and his mate in dealing with the problem. And of course that's the preferred obvious treatment if the cause is a psychological one.
The other main causes of physical impotence, I think, could probably be lumped into the categories of vascular, blood supply problems, and neurological. Currently, neurological impotence is probably best treated with the implant.
A penile implant is a surgically implanted device that enables a man to have erections, ejaculation, and orgasm similar to that before impotence. The procedure is usually performed by a urologist after consulting with the patient on his choice of the type of implant.
Well, the simplest kind is a malleable type like this. They come in pairs, of course, and as you may be able to see, there's a metal cable that runs down through the center, and then it's encased in plastic. And these are implanted. They come in various sizes, and that to tailor to the individual. And then they're just positionable. And just bend them down, bend them out straight, or up against the abdomen, at any position like so. Another type is the inflatable type with a reservoir that goes up inside the abdomen. And these are two inflatable cylinders that go down inside the penis, and then it's controlled by this pump and release valve assembly. And through the skin of the scrotum, why you just the patient just inflates this, and as you may see, this it just transfers the fluid from the reservoir into the cylinders and pump it up to satisfactory rigidity, and then when they're through, why they just press on this lower portion and it releases it. There's a one that's kind of halfway in between the other two. It's self-contained in a pair, just like the malleable were. But there's a little pump mechanism right out near the end that you squeeze there, and it inflates it so that it's rigid. And when you want to release it, why, just bend it sharply and squeeze gently on it, and it goes down. So they all three work, and they work very well.
Since 1973, an estimated 100 to 125,000 American men now have penile implants. John Buchanan is among those who have discovered that help is available for physical impotence.
To me, sex is very important. It always has been. Of course, as a person ages, that slows down. When I was younger, I figured by the time I got to be my age, sex would be a thing of the past, but it hasn't worked out that way.
But it almost worked out that way in 1979. That's when he began suffering from an infected prostate gland.
I went to my family doctor, and he treated me with antibiotics, and it'd clear up, but in a couple months it'd come back. So he referred me to a urologist, and he said, well, eventually it would have to be an operation made and it removed. A doctor told me that I would be impotent after my prostate was removed and wouldn't be able to perform sexually.
Well, I didn't think it was completely over. Well, let's put it this way. I was hoping there was something that could be done, but we really didn't know.
Naturally, it makes you feel less of a man. I mean, you can't perform all the functions of a healthy person, and my relationship with my wife wasn't complete, and at about that time I seen an article in a paper on penile implants, and that seemed like it would really fill the bill for me. So that the next date I had to see my urologist, I asked him if it would work for me, and he said it was made to order for a case like mine.
We talked about it, and I told him I thought it would be a good idea, and we discussed it, and he went and had it done.
After I gained the ability to perform sexually, I felt more of a complete man again. I mean, before you're always kind of looking out of the corner of your eye. The people, you know, whether they're kind of sneering at you for being just part of a man, you know. And after you have this ability returned, why, you gain that, what do I want to say, self-esteem back. So far, there's been no drawbacks. I'm well satisfied with the whole thing. I'm very glad to decide to have it done.
So glad that the Buchanans decided that the public should be more aware of the help available for impotence. Despite such openness, most people prefer confidentiality when discussing this topic. That's why support groups like Impotence Anonymous exist.
Also, I'd like to remind you that what happens in this meeting, I'd like to remain in this meeting.
Impotence Anonymous is built as an anonymous format for men who don't necessarily have any contact at all with physicians or clinical practitioners, to learn something about the disorder, and also to learn that they're not alone. When they first come into Impotence Anonymous, if they have not seen a urologist or have not entered into the proper diagnostic sequence, their most common questions are, gee, I didn't realize there was something that could be done about this, or they're surprised that there are treatments available. No matter what the cause, there are treatments available, and there's something you can do about it.
Impotence Anonymous meetings are conducted in two parts. First, an educational session features questions and answers with a guest medical professional on aspects and diagnosis of the treatment of impotence. In the second portion of the meeting, the professional members are absent, leaving the men to talk about the problems they've encountered and how they can cope with them.
I was really surprised at how much the doctor based that kind of problem on medical things. I really I thought it would be, you know, a psychological health kind of group. And frankly, I haven't seen a doctor, but I think it's about time I do.
Don't suppose there's really anything I can do about it. So I feel very frustrated about it.
I was in your shoes about 3 years ago, and was wondering, you know, what I could do, and I was embarrassed to ask someone and all. And let me tell you, once you get going, there's a lot of help for you. You know, I had a prosthesis.
You did?
Yes, I've got the inflatable type. But boy, you go through hell until you make up your mind to do it, Marsh. I'll tell you, things were pretty rough at home there for quite a while, and we really were almost at the point where we were going to be separated, and I'm very thankful that I went ahead with it.
The way we're set up right now in Impotence Anonymous, we don't espouse any particular philosophy as to treatment. We just try and get the information that we have out to the general public. It's up to them and up to the clinicians to make the decisions on an individual basis. We're primarily educational and support.
Efforts to educate the public about sexuality and aging are on the increase, and some educators are going directly to the source, to older adults who frequent places like the Prince Street Senior Center in Flushing, New York.
What is the most important sex organ in the body? Well, people instantly think of the genital area, right? Sex organ. What's the most important? It isn't there, it's over here. The brain is the...
Dr. Jack Haber is a retired physician. As a medical practitioner, he sees a great need and enthusiasm for sex education for older adults.
I think that older people, myself, have been so shortchanged with respect to sexuality that how can I go on myself in good conscience, knowing about the subject, but I don't impart what I can in small measure. And when I gave a course in general sexuality to older people, this was extremely revealing to me in their intense interest in the subject of sexual relationships. At the present time, there is ample opportunity for younger people to get sex education, but there are very few people like myself who are educating older people in sex education.
It is more likely that sex education is reaching an entirely different audience. In classrooms across the country, many universities are now offering majors in sex education, like the program at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia.
Sex, self-esteem, and self-worth are very closely allied. I've brought sex and aging into the classroom because of a couple of reasons. One is that it's very important to reach professionals in the helping professions regarding this very important phase of life. Second, we have so many people in our population today who are over 60. And with one of their major concerns being the whole area of their sexuality, it's important that professional people be tuned to what their problems and their questions and their needs are. And I do it by having the students, one, imagine themselves in the aging process and as a sexual person. Can you fantasize ahead and think, how would you like it to be? If you could design your own life as a sexual person, what would that be like? Okay, open your eyes. Anybody like to share? Those are very private, I know, and personal thoughts. Anybody like to share?
I was very scared.
Scared?
It frightened me very, very much because the whole aging process is something that, very frankly, I push out of my mind. I want to die before my husband. I don't want to be around if he's not around.
And I just pictured that our sexual activity would gain a certain sweetness and a real, I mean, there could be a great deal of passion also However, I just picture real intensity in terms of feelings and having shared a great deal together.
As a sex educator, Dr. Staten's credentials are somewhat unusual. He is a psychologist as well as an American Baptist minister, and his classes are comprised of students of human sexuality, seminary scholars, and medical students.
There is a kind of a uniqueness about what I have to offer, representing both theology and psychology. Being a person who's in a long-term marriage, I'm a grandfather, and had a lot of training, has tended to give me a lot of credibility, I guess, in this field.
It's also made him an innovator in the classroom, where lectures aren't standard fare and learning isn't rote. The most important lessons are provided by guests who discuss their views on sexuality directly with the students. And in doing so, many of the prevailing myths that students hold about sexuality and aging are brought into question.
And I mean, you know, here that's not true because of all the statistics, but in your gut, it's hard to deal with the fact that someone your parents' age or maybe a little bit older is still enjoying their sexuality.
Well, I think the guests are really excited to be a part of this project. I think that it's helpful for the students because it helps them to become more comfortable in talking with people who are in the aging process, to talk about sex, and to deal with it more creatively. For educators, I think that one of the things that we know is that education about the aging process when people are young is very important, so that they're prepared for it. Waiting until they reach that time in their life is not as helpful as starting when people are young.
It seems only fitting that a younger, more informed generation may have a step up on us for better understanding and appreciating our sexuality. It's an important part of our lives that we've known too little about for too long. But then again, some of us have been fortunate enough to have appreciated it all along. The preceding program was funded by Mutual of Omaha and Nebraskans for Public Television.